Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 569 through 571, which will cover manga chapters 649 through 651. And the Straw Hats are going to party it up, but these episodes also drop a bunch of new juicy developments for the story as well. Alright, so the Straw Hats have beaten Hody and the new Fishman Pirates and are now ready for the party to begin with the people of Ryugu Palace. Afterwards, though, Robin questions King Neptune about the mysterious figure mentioned in the poneglyphs, Joy Boy, while Jinbei catches everyone up on the current state of the world during the 2 years that they were absent. Alright, so differences. There are just a handful of differences in these episodes. First one being Neptune tries to give a speech during the party, but is constantly interrupted by Luffy in the anime. This doesn't happen in the manga. Another scene is in the anime, we see how Sanji turns to stone and he's kind of surrounded by mermaids, while in the manga, it just shows a panel of him already turned to stone. So we don't actually see how he turned. I mean, we can kind of infer it was because he's surrounded by all these beautiful mermaids. The next scene that was changed is where Caribou attempts to abduct Shirahoshi. This scene is a little bit longer in the anime, because we get to see sort of the beginning of him sneaking up to her from the ceiling. While in the manga, we immediately just jump to the scene where she's already covered in the swamp mud. In the anime, another scene that's weirdly changed is, for some reason, when everybody visits Hody and the new Fishman Pirates in the prison tower, Nami is included in this group, while in the manga, she's not there. I don't know why she was included for this scene at all, to be quite honest. It doesn't really make sense why she's there, other than for maybe they wanted a scene with like a Straw Hat in there for some reason. I don't know why this was changed. But lastly, the anime has a scene where Luffy mentions that he's seen someone like Peckham's, and it cuts to Chopper sneezing due to sort of that Japanese superstition where if someone's talking about you somewhere else or behind your back, you sneeze. This moment is not in the manga. There are a couple other minor changes that you see sort of to extend the length of time. Like it takes Luffy longer to pick up the Dendemushi, or you see Peckham's like cute little dot eyes a third time, where in the manga you only see it twice. And, there are little things there. I'm not going to go through and list all the little tiny changes, but they are there to kind of sort of pad out the runtime for a lot of these episodes. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get into the story itself. So, now that things have returned to peace, King Neptune must now deal with the fallout, and specifically the human slaves and the remnants of the new Fishman Pirates. And I will say this is definitely a very simplistic and idealistic resolution of freeing all the human slaves and also reintegrating the Fishman District people back into the main island society. Like, on the surface, it seems like a great thing, but at the same time, in reality, something like this would be insanely difficult and definitely wouldn't go as smoothly as it does here. But, it's a make-believe story, and I'll let that slide, for the convenience of a happy ending. But yeah, I mean, in the back of my head, I'm always thinking this would not go nearly as smoothly as possible. I mean, you just have to look at our own U.S. history right now to kind of see that. But yeah. Anyways, the Straw Hats are already on their way out, not wanting to be heroes, and I just love that Zoro and Luffy are on the complete same wavelength when it comes to wanting to be seen as a hero, and their sort of reasoning of not wanting to be a hero. Except in Zoro's case, instead of not wanting to be obliged to share his meat, Zoro doesn't want to share his booze with people. And this will never not make me laugh, and I just love how similar Luffy and Zoro are in this respect, and in many other respects. Then we get to the bad news about Jinbei that I alluded to at the end of the last podcast episode, which is the fact that Jinbei can't join the crew right now due to some other obligations that he needs to fulfill, but has stated that he will return and accept the invitation. But this was such a gut punch after the last chapter or episode. Like, we finally get a new Straw Hat member, but he can't join yet. And Oda knew that he wanted Jinbei to join, but also understood just how OP the crew would get with him in the crew, so he smartly held this off. And to be honest, I think this is also partly for his own sanity too as a writer, since writing a story with 10 main characters along with a whole host of side characters and tertiary characters, is exceedingly difficult. I don't know how Oda does it, to be quite honest. But Oda does split the crew up often so that he can kind of dedicate enough time to all the characters. But even then, it's still difficult for him, and a lot of characters do get sidelined. But beyond the main 5 from the East Blue, Oda does tend to struggle to give enough for everyone to do, particularly Robin, Frankie, and Brooke. So I can see why he chose to hold off Jinbei in that regard as well, because yeah, he just adds another layer to that. And while I understand it, it's still incredibly disappointing nonetheless. And I remember I was so disappointed when I read the next chapter the first time I saw it. I was like, no! And yeah, and of course I understood it. And looking back on hindsight, it does make a lot of sense. Jinbei being unable to join right away was certainly a massive bummer, especially with how much he's been built up since Impel Down, with how much he seems to care for Luffy and how well he already fits in with the Straw Hat crew. And I got so excited, but for now we'll just have to wait patiently until he returns. Neptune reaches them and they finally get to have their banquet as they're celebrated as heroes despite the protests from Luffy and Zoro. One of my favorite parts about this sequence is Sanji screaming in this really unnatural way at the sight of the Mermaid Cafe dancers and Chopper yelling at him, "Shut up!" because he can't enjoy the actual singing anymore due to Sanji's crazed screaming. And one cool thing about this scene in the anime is that everything after the singing starts till when Neptune gives his speech, we get focus and dialogue associated with each thing happening here. And this is noteworthy because in the manga, this is actually just a massive 2-page spread where it shows everything happening all at once. And you only get to see a still image of all the different interactions and all the different things happening. The manga does a good job of conveying the overall massive scale of the party, while the anime does a good job of actually letting us see what these little moments are. And again, I don't necessarily fault one medium or the other. They both add 2 different perspectives to the same thing. And I think the anime does a good job of using its medium to expand on this by actually showing us all these individual moments. But it is also cool to see that wide shot of just everybody going crazy and seeing all these little vignettes happening in that same scene. But once the party's over, we get to the juicy part. We probably get one of the biggest additions to the lore when Robin asks to speak with Neptune alone, to which he hilariously thinks Robin is hitting on him and refuses her bashfully because he's that committed to his late wife Otohime, which I think is really cute and sweet. And the anime even goes as far as to show Neptune trying to hide behind his tail fin, which we don't get to see in the manga. And I think that's such a funny image of this massive hulking king just bashfully cowering behind his tail because he's so embarrassed that he's being hit on by Robin, or that he thinks he's being hit on by Robin. But anyways, now to the important part of this scene. Robin finally asks who Joy Boy is and who is he apologizing to. Neptune goes on to explain that according to legend passed down through the generations of the royal family, that Joy Boy was a person that lived on the surface world during the Void Century, and that poneglyph that Robin found was an apology letter to the mermaid princess of that time for breaking a promise that is unknown to everyone, but that one day someone will come in his place to fulfill that promise someday. And that's why Fishman Island's royal family have protected the Noah all these centuries, and when that promised time comes that the Noah will be put to use for its originally intended purpose, but what that purpose is still unclear to everybody. Then we get the truly goosebump-raising revelation and connection. Although, like I've been saying, this was pretty apparent to most of us that the poneglyph that Robin found at the base of the Golden Bell in Skypia indicated that the location of the second weapon, Poseidon, was going to be on Fishman Island. And it turns out that Shirahoshi is in fact the ancient weapon Poseidon. Watching this scene again still brings goosebumps and chills all over my body, even though I already knew that this was where it was leading, especially now knowing just how important a figure Joy Boy really is, as well as the ancient weapons, where I am in the current story. This is where we also learn for the first time that there are in fact 3 ancient weapons, and the third one's name is Uranus, with Pluton and Poseidon being the other 2. Now, immediately you see a trend here that they're all named after Greek gods, Pluto, the god of the underworld, Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Uranus, the god of earth, or Gaia. Once this was revealed, speculation and theory crafting went wild among the community, trying to figure out the different associations and the meanings behind all of this. And in fact, it's still going to this very day as we learn more and more about all of this between the ancient kingdom, the ancient weapons, and all of this, the connections to like space and all of that with Enel's cover story. It's pretty crazy. Like once this reveal happened, the community just went nuts because it's a huge deal. And yeah, I kind of like started to think about, I wonder what could this mean for what Uranus could be. Now, for now, there's not much point in going into detail about all the potential directions the story could go with these, or what the names of the weapons could mean, or what and where the third weapon, Uranus, could be. But one thing to note is that for some reason, Oda had Caribou overhear this information, which is something to keep an eye on because Oda never includes details like this for no reason. And this will definitely come back to sort of play a role. Unfortunately, Caribou will still be part of the story. But the next big story reveal is then dropped on us right afterwards as Jinbei fills Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats, as well as us, the audience, on the state of the world. The first huge development was that directly after the Paramount War, Sengoku retired from his post, as he kind of indicated that he might, which also kind of leads credence to the idea that even for Sengoku, what they did at the war left a bad taste in his mouth. And in his place, he recommended that Aokiji be promoted as his successor, while the higher-ups, most likely the Gorosei, wanted Akainu to succeed Sengoku as the next fleet admiral. Aokiji not wanting Akainu to take over the Marines, knowing full well what kind of man he is and what he's capable of, especially after witnessing him give the order to fire upon and eliminate a civilian refugee vessel trying to flee the Buster Call on Ohara all those years back. And in order to decide, they held a duel for the right to claim the position of the Marines' next fleet admiral, and it's said that their battle lasted 10 days at mostly an even level until ultimately Akainu came out on top as the victor. But even as merciless as Akainu has been, there seems to be some humanity still in him and some fondness towards Aokiji as he leaves him alive, unable to finish him off. Aokiji, unable to serve under Akainu, leaves the Marines, which was a huge surprise, and is now quite the wild card, just kind of out there. This guy basically is a walking WMD, now completely untethered to any organization, just out there without any clue as to what he's going to do. To me, Aokiji has always been more on the good side, so I imagine that he'd be out there eventually showing, up to potentially help the Straw Hats down the line. And I still believe that this is what will probably happen in the end. But along the way, Oda has taken Aokiji, or Kuzan, as I'll refer to him going forward since he's no longer part of the Marines, he takes him in a very interesting and unexpected direction. Additionally, I'll also refer to Akainu as Sakazuki now that he has moved on beyond his admiral position. But yeah, Aokiji leaving the Marines was a big surprise, and we'll definitely talk more about his character as he shows up, but I don't want to get too much into that here. Now, one thing is clear though, this is definitely bad news for the pirates, and pretty much for the world, if the guiding principles and the man at the top is a ruthless soldier whose mantra is absolute justice. What's not clear though is who will replace the two admirals. With Kuzan and Sakazuki both vacating their admiral positions, that just leaves Kizaru. It'll be interesting to see if we get two more unbelievably strong Marines to fill their positions. And I think many people at the time, including myself, thought maybe Smoker might take over one of the positions, but at the same time, I never really felt like that would happen because it just doesn't make a lot of sense for two specific reasons on my part. Like, Smoker hates the higher-ups, and I doubt he'd want to become one of them at this point, especially with his goal still being to hunt down the Straw Hats. And also, we know that Smoker is just not one of those people that likes to follow authority all that much. And so him becoming a lapdog to the Celestial Dragons just seemed really, really unlikely. And also, I mean, even if there's 2 years of a gap, going from a captain to an admiral is probably too big of a jump, in my opinion. I mean, it's certainly possible, but it just seems really weird to jump that many ranks. Regardless, it'll be fun to speculate and see who the next two admirals will be. The next big piece of news of the world from Jinbei is that in the 2 years since the war, Blackbeard has gone on to essentially take over Whitebeard's vacated territory and took his spot as the fourth Yonko emperor, which I wasn't all that surprised to find out. And during this, we get to see that silhouette of the big Yonko for pirates. And like I said back on Water 7, I do find these early silhouettes of Kaido and Big Mom to be hilariously bad. But Big Mom did actually get a little bit closer to her actual design. But good lord, Kaido's design is really... He got a much needed massive glow up when he's finally revealed much later on in the story. The other surprising thing to learn about Blackbeard is that his ability to steal Whitebeard's devil fruit powers was not just a one-off thing, and that he seems to have the ability to do it to whoever he wants. And in the 2 years, he's been running around hunting devil fruit powers and basically stealing them and killing the people. No doubt to power up his crew, which is crazy to hear and adds another element to the massive threat that Blackbeard poses, which is, again, not surprising why he's been considered a Yonko now. And Chopper getting scared that he's in danger of being hunted is funny, as Usopp points out, what human would want the Hito fruit as the power, because it'd be so useless to a human. Of course, Luffy, as always, is barely paying attention to any of this important intel on the state of the world, and we get another cute and hilarious one-liner from Chopper. Since he's so naive that he just assumes that not paying attention is what all pirate captains do, then we get the classic moment of a slight regret and exasperation that someone has agreed to follow this man into the Grand Line, and Jinbei is now experiencing that as well. Kami then comes by to get Luffy back to the party. However, Luffy immediately feels something, no doubt his observation haki kicking into gear, and it's basically confirmed here that Zoro and Sanji also have it as well, but theirs isn't quite as strong as Luffy's, as they don't notice the danger until Luffy points it out to them. It turns out that Caribou is in the process of trying to kidnap Shirahoshi again. Luckily, the monster trio is there immediately to take care of him and save Shirahoshi. We then get a funny moment where Nami basically kicks the monster trio out and has them go after Caribou for all the treasure that he's got hidden inside his body. Moving on, the end of episode 570 sees the reveal of what happened to Hody and his officers, and it's not pretty, as they have now wasted away into old age with white hair. Now on the surface, this may seem like a simple comeuppance for overusing the steroids, but like I mentioned a few episodes back, that classic folktale of Urashima Taro, where when he opened the Tamate box after returning from the Ryugu palace in that story, he lost his youth and turned into an old man with white hair, and this is kind of paying off that final reference to that story. In addition to the reference to the story, this development also is a reflection on the themes of this arc, on how living with all this hate will essentially waste away your entire life into nothingness and emptiness, as well as how their outward appearance has now caught up to the incredibly outdated ways of thinking and viewing the world. And it's quite poignant that Fukaboshi ends his last interaction with Hody by saying, "Keep quiet, I don't want the children of this island to hear you." This seems to cut deep into Hody, judging by his sort of subtle reaction, because it's dawned on him that he's no longer the future, he is the past. And the children that Fukaboshi is talking about are the new future, one that will embrace sort of both human and fishman relations. If we look on another level, and this one's pretty obvious, but it also drives home the message to kids, especially of how dangerous steroids can be. Sure, there are safe ways to use steroids in the real world, but it is very easy to start abusing steroids, which can have dire health consequences in the real world. So this acts as a simple warning to kids that they should be careful or just stay away from using steroids at any point in their lives, really. One aspect of the energy steroids that's always been curious to me is where they came from. Because despite their sort of magical fable-like quality and this aura of like old legend status, they also give off this incredibly modern and scientifically made vibe as well. My thought was always that along with how old they are and the scientific nature of them, that they were actually a technology that was created during the Ancient Kingdom. And this was then passed down to the Fishman royal family as perhaps a last-ditch measure to give them a way to fight back. And maybe from this Joy Boy person himself. And yeah, it's kind of gives off this feeling, especially with Fishman Island, kind of this sort of sea type of environment and sort of this ancient kingdom. It kind of gives off the sense of like Atlantis, in our real life folklore, where you have this sort of legendary city or mythical city that is questionable whether it even existed, but it's said that this city had like incredible technological advancements far beyond what we have today, and then it just something happened and they just went away. And so yeah, I'm kind of starting to envision the ancient kingdom to be this sort of more technologically advanced country that used to live but for whatever reason was wiped out. And this can also be kind of seen with the poneglyphs, the way the poneglyphs are depicted and made. They're made of these like unbreakable stones. And you have to have some sort of a technology to make something like that. And so, yeah, that's kind of where my thought was at the time, and it still kind of is, even with all the new information that we've kind of been given throughout the series. But yeah, at the moment, though, we just don't know. And most of this is just mine and much of the fan base's sort of thoughts. Now, as we go on to sort of the last section of these episodes, setting up events to come for the rest of the series, we get the appearance of two members from the Big Mom Pirates, Peckums and Baron Tamago, who are here to collect their payment of sweets in exchange for Big Mom's protection. So in the time that Whitebeard left the world, obviously due to his passing, and we heard that Jinbei mentioned that Fishman Island was susceptible to attack, and we started to see some of that at the end of the pre-time skip era. And so in order for Fishman Island to kind of stay protected, they had to make a deal with another emperor, and that was Big Mom. Now, in the Crunchy subs, they translate Big Mom as Big Ma'am, but that's obviously incorrect. However, I don't really fault the translators because it sounds like ma'am in Japanese, because there really isn't a sound to distinguish the MA sound with the MO sound in this scenario. The other mistake that was made with these subtitles is that they translate Big Mom's real name, Charlotte Linlin, as Ling Ling with the G at the end. And this is, again, at the time, it was probably hard to distinguish because of the fact that in Japanese, there's really no specific sound to make that ING sound in Japanese. So anything that ends with an N or an ING, both sound very similar. And so I can understand why this translation error was also made. Keeping kind of on a translator's notes, both Peckums and Baron Tamago's names are food themed to match Big Mom's theme of food and kind of gluttony, especially for sweets. Peckums is a reference to the common Japanese phrase "onaka ga peko peko," or "my stomach is empty," peko peko being the term for empty. The Baron Tamago, many of you might already be able to figure out if you've been to a sushi restaurant. Tamago means egg in Japanese, and if it wasn't already clear, half of his body is half an eggshell. And the subs do actually translate this for you, which I found interesting. They actually go parentheses egg. And yeah, there's also more to Tamago for why he's called that as well. Similarly with Peckums as well. I gotta say, I love Peckums. Like he's such a funny character with the eyes, and then how he ends almost every sentence with "gao," which is like the grr sound that is the equivalent Japanese onomatopoeia. Their character designs are really something though. Oda has always had some crazy weird character designs, but I feel like with the Big Mom Pirates, he's really starting to go nuts in a good way. Like you look at this at a silhouette of either of these characters and you immediately know who they are. Not to mention the insane colors he uses for both of them. Both their speech patterns are also very recognizable, as they have very unique speech patterns, with Peckums ending his sentences with that trademark "gao," and then the Baron Tamago also with his weird sort of French flair, with his sentences ending in "bon" and "soir" and all that stuff. As you might have guessed, though, the New World and post-time skip era of One Piece is going to be focusing more on the Yonko, or the Four Emperors, as the main threats of the series, whereas much of the pre-time skip era focused on the Shichibukai. Of course, the Shichibukai are still a thing, and there are plenty of them still out there, but with Jinbei talking about how Blackbeard is now a Yonko, additionally mentioning Kaido, and now the introduction of Big Mom, we can clearly see what the series is beginning to set up. It's here that we get our first look at Big Mom and her home island of Whole Cake Island. And she's presented as this massive obese woman. And when I say massive, I don't mean that she's just really fat. It's that she's a giant size, as well as being a very rotund woman. And we don't get a full look at her, but we can already see she is a monstrous presence. Like in that one shot of her bending down to talk to that one little henchman that she has, it is pretty intimidating. And even in the manga, it's even more intimidating to see, because I don't know, they do something with her eyes that she has this like incredibly piercing eye stare. They try and do that in the anime, and they get it mostly right, but for some reason the manga is just crazy scary. And we also start getting to see some of her henchmen, particularly a young girl with 3 eyes sitting next to her. And this is a character you'll want to keep an eye on for the future, pun intended. This is another really effective introduction to an antagonist that Luffy will most definitely need to face in the future. And she comes off as an incredible threat just based on her introduction alone. There's this insane dissonance with her sort of persona of being this really sweet and bright, almost Disney fairy tale-esque vibe of about her and her island. But hidden underneath is this incredibly volatile and violent monster. You can already tell that Big Mom is not someone you want to mess with. It's also perfectly represented in that wide shot of Whole Cake Island with sort of the bright and colorful island itself, but its backdrop is behind or in front of this dark and ominous cloud. In her anger at the news that she's not getting her sweets from Fishman Island, she calls Peckhams and Tamago. But I love that they keep the running joke of Luffy being the one to pick up a Dendemushi that aren't meant for him at all before anyone else can, and introduces himself as Monkey D. Luffy, the man who will become the Pirate King. This is of course a reference to just after Impel Down when he answers that Dendemushi. And without missing a beat, he admits to eating all 10 tons of the sweets that was meant for Big Mom. But Luffy does offer to give her all the treasure as recompense for that, but she still denies it, saying that you can't eat treasure, and she's kind of got a point there. Big Mom, then seeing this situation, redirects her anger and attention from Fishman Island to Luffy, and Luffy, being the crazy yet confident guy he is, doesn't miss a beat and actually challenges Big Mom, saying that she's too dangerous and volatile to leave Fishman Island to her, and in his trademark fashion picks a fight with Big Mom, an emperor of the sea, and tells her that he'll kick her ass and make Fishman Island his territory under his protection now. And granted, we don't quite know just how strong a Yonko pirate actually is at this point, but the way these people are treated and talked about, we know they are on a whole other level, even compared to the Shichibukai, and this just seems really foolish on Luffy's part, but it's still awesome nonetheless to see. And it's become clear that the second half of One Piece will be mostly about taking on and surpassing the Yonko. And that includes Shanks and Blackbeard as well, as they are part of the Yonko. And the crazy thing is that there are still a few Shichibukai out there to deal with, particularly Doflamingo and Kuma. We also still don't know who took over the 3 Shichibukai spots vacated by Moria, Jinbei, and Blackbeard after the Paramount War as well. So there could be more Shichibukai to deal with as well. The introduction of Big Mom was something, though. I think Big Mom is probably one of the most intimidating and scariest villains in all of One Piece. Like, her design, even though we don't get the full look of her here, it is still enough to give us this sense of real danger and grotesqueness associated with her, and her almost like unnatural look. Just in this scene alone, you can glean a lot about her character that really sets her up to be a force to be reckoned with. First off, the reaction of everyone else, between how terrified the fish people are of her, but then seeing her own crew be scared of her, really adds credence to that. Not to mention her design is just monstrous. I mean, literally, she just looks like a monster with those big beady eyes, the large gaping mouth that's drooling what seems to be acid, as well as the implied fact that she seemingly ate some of her own subordinates. And yeah, it's a design unlike anything we've seen so far. There are other things I find really effective about her intro too, especially when it comes to her demeanor and speech patterns. She has this sort of unhinged, erratic quality that's also quite scary, because it seems like she's this kind and almost sweet mama figure that 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 sort of holds for a little while and then will just fly off the handle at any moment with the slightest thing. And another interesting part about Big Mom is her speech pattern that doesn't quite come across in translations, is that despite being a woman, Big Mom doesn't use the traditional feminine pronouns. And I don't mean that she identifies as a man or is trans in any way, but the way she talks, she uses the masculine pronouns despite portraying herself to be sort of this matriarch of her crew, which you can even see how her crew calls her mama, following a similar trend as her once fellow Yonko pirate Whitebeard used to have his crew call him Oyaji or Pops. Now, Big Mom specifically, despite being a woman, uses the pronoun ore, which is traditionally a masculine way of saying I, instead of sort of the neutral one, which is gender neutral watashi, or the more feminine atashi, making it seem even more off kilter when listening to her speak in Japanese. Also, one last thing to mention about Big Mom is that in this episode's appearance, this is the only time Big Mom is actually voiced by Toshiko Fujita. She will actually be recast when she makes her more significant role appearance when she re-enters the story about 200 episodes later. But yeah, that pretty much covers these 3 episodes. There's a lot that happened. With the main conflict in Fishman Island over, the world of One Piece just breaks wide open with news of the changes in the balance of power in the world with both the Marines and the pirates, the proper introduction of the Yonko emperors, and a whole new information dump of lore when it comes to the ancient kingdom, the ancient weapons, and this mysterious figure only known by the name Joy Boy, who might tie them all together along with the One Piece. And things are about to get even crazier from here on out as they approach closer to entering the new world. So it'll be really fun to see how that all plays out. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes and to see some of my manga collection. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. There will be a spoiler section because there are a lot of things that this set of episodes references that basically become very important later on. So I'll talk about that in the spoiler section. But as always, thanks for listening and stay safe out there. Hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so a spoiler section. So there are a lot of things to talk about in this spoiler section. I'm not going to go too far deep into them, just mostly kind of my overall thoughts. But I guess the first thing is the ancient weapons. So this is the point in the story where we do learn that there are 3 of them, and one is called Uranus. And obviously we already know about Poseidon and Pluton. And yeah, this was a pretty crazy reveal, but also the fact that from here until all the way past Wano do we finally learn more about Uranus. And Uranus is definitely one of those things that just loomed heavily over the story. We just never knew where Uranus was, and now we finally know that it is in the possession of the world government, and specifically with Imu and the Gorosei. And that, yeah, like many people had predicted, that because of the way the 3 worked out, that Pluton was going to be the sort of the land or the middle ground, and then you have Poseidon being the sea, and then you have Uranus, the sky. And yeah, Uranus, we haven't actually seen Uranus, but we've seen what it's capable of doing. And it's basically what Crocodile said what Pluton was capable of doing, is wiping out an entire island. And it was crazy to also find out that Pluton is probably the thing that caused the giant gaping hole underneath Ennius Lobby. So that was another crazy thing. And then also to kind of tie everything together too, is that it's seemingly that Uranus and firing it off is what caused the world to start sinking. And at some point they must have used that thing so much that much of the world was sunk underwater. As we will see in Jinbei's flashback that there was some, definitely some life underneath on the ground floor or the sea floor, and we see all of that happening in Jinbei's cover story. But yeah, it's very interesting how all this ties together, because that then ties to Noah and Shirahoshi and Poseidon, and just the idea of the fact that the world is sinking. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Noah was meant to probably protect people, or at least kind of give them safe harbor until that time when the world is on the brink of sinking. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to kind of see how all of this ties together now. And speaking of the ancient weapons, the fact that Caribou knows about the ancient weapons, this is the first time he overhears it and not the last time either, because he'll eventually go on to overhear about Pluton being located in Wano. And then now we see in Egghead that he is going to use this information to bargain his way into the Blackbeard Pirates to get in the good graces of Teach. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that too, because a lot of people at this point are thinking that not with that information, Blackbeard will then go and attack the remaining, two territories that Luffy and the Straw Hats have basically claimed to protect, which is Wano and Fishman Island. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. Now, Aokiji is a very interesting character, and like I said in the non-spoiler section, that I was not really expecting this kind of outcome for Aokiji. And yeah, because Kuzan, like, now that he's gone, he still seems like a good guy. I mean, he comes in to protect Smoker from Doflamingo at the end of Punk Hazard, but then he goes on to join Blackbeard and starts to do some pretty bad things. And the last we've seen of him is that he's basically just beat Garp, and now Garp is a prisoner of Blackbeard. And I don't know, I still have a hard time believing that Aokiji is a bad guy and that he'll eventually be bad. I think he's with Blackbeard for his own personal reasons, and that eventually he will turn on Blackbeard. But it's just really interesting to see him just joining one of the worst pirate crews of all. But yeah, I honestly do not know where Oda is taking Kuzan's character, but I do think Kuzan will ultimately end up being a force for good more so than a force for bad. At least when I say a force for good, I mean on Luffy's side, that he will eventually help the Straw Hats, because everything we know about Kuzan, I have a hard time believing that he will turn completely evil at any point. And then one last thing I kind of wanted to mention, and this isn't really anything, but I find it funny how in this episode, we see Luffy challenge Big Mom, and he says that he'll beat her ass. But when you really look at it, he never actually beats her. Like, he runs away from her in Whole Cake Island. Sure, it's a victory nonetheless. Like, he gets everything he wants, and they escape Whole Cake Island. But Luffy is no match for Big Mom at that point in the story. And then again, when Big Mom returns in Wano, he's not the one that defeats her. In fact, it's actually Law and Kid that end up defeating Big Mom. So Luffy never actually kicks her ass. And I guess by extension, like, he beats Kaido. So you probably have a good idea that Luffy can now beat Big Mom, now that he has access to Gear 5th and his Nika powers. But yeah, at no point does Luffy ever actually make good on that promise of kicking her ass, which I found interesting. That I when I rewatched these episodes and he says that quote, and I was like, I guess he never actually completes this. But yeah, that's just a funny little thought that I had. Anyways, those are most of the spoiler things I wanted to talk about. Obviously, there's way more to get into with the Ancient Kingdom, Joy Boy, and all of that. But honestly, like, that stuff probably we'll talk more about when it actually comes up in the main series, because there's not really like a lot of spoiler things here. But yeah, I mean, definitely Joy Boy, who Joy Boy is and who they were is still pretty much unknown. Luffy is looking like he's basically the reincarnation of Joy Boy, or at least his powers are as a reincarnation of Joy Boy. And so yeah, there's still a lot left up in the air that I don't really know how to speculate on, so I'm just gonna kind of leave it there. But anyways, thanks for listening, and hope to catch you on the next episode. See ya!